So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It's a great pleasure today to welcome Marie Morelle from Lyon de Lumière de University in France. And she's going to be talking to us today on the subject of From Yaoundé to Cayenne, penal politics in the South. Marie is a professor of geography, and her interests cover penal politics and imprisonment and policing and urban security in many contexts, including both Africa and South America. So it's a huge pleasure to welcome you, Marie, and over to you.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the seminar. Thank you to be here. So I will share some slides. Yes. Okay. So perhaps to introduce my research, my little speak, I would like to explain 3 periods of research: individual and also collective research. So from 2010 to 2017, I conducted an ethnographic survey in Yaoundé Central Prison in Cameroon. So I didn't have the authorization to do fieldwork in other prisons all around the country. My authorization were increasingly reduced due to the political context, the end of regime, perhaps, the fight against terrorism, and also the war in the English-speaking regions against the secessionist movement. But at the same time, I was able to exchange more and more with many prison administration officials who wanted to think about changes, especially in the training of guards and directors. But we were blocked in a project at the highest level. So, and another research program. So it was from 2015, and during 4 years, I co-directed the economies of punishment and prison in Africa with Frédéric Le Marcis. And we had several axes, an historical approach of the prison and carcerality, ethnographies of prisons, prison reform in connection with development studies, and also the prison footprint outside the prison. So we have published 2 collective books, one in French and the other in English, co-directed by also Julia Hornberger, yes, from Johannesburg. And we produced a MOOC. So you can find the book of the MOOC available also in English. And the goal was to share our findings with prison administrations, NGOs, activists, lawyers, and students. So, and this year, I was able to begin, again with Frédéric Le Marcis, an exploratory research in French Guiana in partnership with the unit care of the prison, and so with Dr. Timothy Bonifay. So in French Guiana, we are looking at the question of the place of prison in the healthcare process. We ask if the prison can be a resource in a context where access to healthcare is very difficult. So why? Because there is a big difference between healthcare facilities between French Guiana and mainland France. And also there is an unequal access to healthcare facilities because of different status in French Guiana. The foreigners, the undocumented migrants, and more simply, massive poverty in a post-colonial or perhaps colonial context. I'm sorry, it doesn't work if I'm doing like that. Okay, no. So if I try to draw some cross-cutting axes of analysis, it will be the informal dimension of prison governance, the importance of the carceral continuum, and also the aporia of development projects. What is a good prison model? So at the end, what prison in the South said about prisons, and what and where is the South? So I hope to respond to the seminar's call for a comparative dimension. What should we compare? The penalization process, the prison experience, the prisons as a revelation of inequalities and power, and should we talk more about less studied context and situations, or what can this context add to theorization of carceral studies? So I would like to present the organization of prison space in Yaoundé and also in Cayenne, and then discuss the comparison of two spaces marked by an informal dimension. So I will present some work I did in Yaoundé Central Prison. It's my old field work, but perhaps it's a beginning for sharing and for the discussion. So firstly, we have to keep in mind that the importation of the penal prison in Africa through colonization. So the prison is a tool of conquest. It's also a pretext for civilization compared to other forms of punishment, and it will remain an instrument of domination of African populations. So the penal prison is maintained with independence. It is appropriated by societies. Even it's important to look at how it is negotiated, discussed. It exists among different ways of interpreting justice and injustice and of rendering justice. But prison is here. So secondly, in a large prison, in a large city as Yaoundé, we are caught up in the overcrowding people, the constant thumping. The prisons offers 800 places, but for 3,000 to 4,000 inmates. So I think geography is helpful in building landmarks. So I will show some old maps I did. So at the beginning, we can see a classic prison architecture, watchtowers, doors, detention quarters. We identify quarters for men, women, minors, death row inmates. Yes. And at the first sight, the quarters seems to correspond to 3 criteria: age, gender, and the inmate sentence. There are some special quarters, particularly for women, minors, and inmate condemned to death. The guards have an office in the main yard, and we have also watchtowers, as I said, and the surveillance apparatus is completed with 2 disciplinary cells. So it's quite classical. But we have to, at the second site, there is 3 other special quarters. There are VIP quarters for former ministers, top civil servants, and public or private company, key executive officers. These wings protect them from other inmates' muggings. But unlike women and minors, these inmates, these VIP, can take walks in the yard with bodyguards, and these bodyguards are inmates. So an analysis of the other quarters is necessary to better understand the disciplinary apparatus. We have to think about quarter 1, quarter 3 on the one hand, and also quarter 8, 9, and 10 on the other end. Because if you see the quarter here, and then change the map, quarter 8 and quarter 9, that's this one, accommodate the majority of inmates. They are known as Kosovo. They accommodate more than 1,000 inmates. And so overcrowding implies other dynamic of surveillance. So the Kosovo inmates are considered as repulsive within the prison. Together with the inmates of the laundry, a quarter which mentally sick persons, and the condemned to death inmates, the Kosovo inmates are wont to define themselves as the bottom of the prison. These quarters are attributed to working class individuals, especially second offenders and serious criminals. And the bottom of the prison is opposite to quarter 1, quarter 3, and also VIP quarters, which constitute the top of the prisons. In these wings, inmates consider themselves as responsible persons. So they try to be distinguished from the other inmates, from the Kosovo offenders. They are receivers, soldiers, people condemned for corruption. Whatever the case, inmates must buy a place within the prison. So you have to give money to a chief discipline, another inmate, or to the prison director, or to the guard, if you want to go to the top of the prison, for example. Depending on the nature of the crime, the penitentiary authorities may refuse access to the top of the prisons. So Kosovo accommodates the poorest. The arrival in quarter 8 and quarter 9 is only the beginning of a rough initiation to prison. And because of overcrowding, there are not enough beds, so inmates without a bed become sleeping on the grounds once they are assigned to a cell, but without money nor acquaintance, they will sleep on the ground. Yeah. So in quarter 1, in quarter 3, for example, inmates seems to have a better lot because they've got a bed. But there is a price because there is a lot of cell search going on there. Guards are looking for illegal things. For example, if a guard discovers a mobile phone, he will punish the inmate. What's the punishment? Going to the Kosovo. In order to avoid this kind of punishment, the inmate will corrupt the guards. So as a conclusion, we can say that in the context of a crowded prison, architecture is not enough to control the inmates. Beyond, the goals of the authority are not just punishing, but also money-making. So another idea is to show how the quarters are interconnected, except for women, minors, and to a lesser degree, VIPs. There is a lot of daily and weekly mobilities. The taxi drivers, inmates, are in charge of new circulation. They play a major role on visiting days. When families arrive in the main yard, the taxi driver will look for the inmates they are visiting. Then there are delivery boys. They work for women. They give them news for men in other quarters. They are sent by women to buy food in Kosovo or to deliver mails to some woman's lover. There are other kinds of mobility. Some inmates try to escape from their quarter during the day. They are looking for quieter places, particularly the condemned to death person quarter or quarter 1, 3, sometimes VIP. The majority are recruited as VIP bodyguards or majordomo. They cook, they wash clothes, they clean the cells. In exchange, they can eat, wash their own clothes, use the showers and toilets located in quieter and safer places. And also there are mobilities for playing cards, times for prayer, Muslim, Catholic, Protestant, and Pancratist. And people are not equal. One circulation, it depends on one sentences. For instance, condemned to death persons can go everywhere in the prison. On the whole, however, mobility depends on relation, acquaintances, and money. So I don't describe everything, but at the end, we can say that carceral space is a combination of places and doorsteps. The division of the prison means security. When one controls a place, a quarter, a cell, a bed, one has secured a money-making spot. People which control a doorstep so control the mobilities and mobilities, are fundamental in an inmate daily life. Each doorstep constitutes a checkpoint and a racketeering place. Such places and sign-ups mean money, status, and power. So gradually, I understand the informal dimension of prison governance, delegations of power between guards and inmates, the ambiguity between inmate cooperation and resistance to prison control, corruption between inmates and guards, between visitors and guards, the right to circulate or not, the way to have an access to different resources. Well, we can notice how much the privation in prison generates skills, a capacity also to create resources. Inmates generate income and remain a support to their families. If you have some money or some power, you can circulate, you can make money, you can send money to the outside. So third, I can take the example of the prison of Cayenne. So I made only one field work during 10 days in July, so it's quite a mess in my head. So once again, how can we characterize the carceral space? By overcrowding. So there is an issue with smell, closed quarters, and heat, so many heat. The prison, it's around 6,000 places and for 1,000 inmates. So there is a project to build another prison also in French Guiana, but for the moment there is only one prison for all the French Guiana, and it's in Cayenne, and so it's overcrowded. There is a lot of cross-categorization on the part of different prison actors and groups, according to age, gender, and motives. Criminal factions from Brazil, Terror de la Amapa, sometimes Comando Vermelho, not a lot of PCC. But also seniority, length of sentence, which influences grouping processes by affinities, by ethnicizations also. The poverty is massive. The inmates have very few resources, and the family of inmates are also poor, so they received not a lot of visits. And without visits, you don't have a lot of resources. The carceral space is also characterized by an apprenticeship from arrival to installation and following forms of prison routinization. And what is also interesting, it's the career path of the guards, because the guards are French, they are born in French Guiana, but they make all the career in the mainland France. And at the end of when they become very old, they have the right to come back to finish the career in French Guiana. And so it's very interesting to hear them making a comparison between prisons of mainland France and prisons of the prison of French Guiana too. The prison, it's also marked by violence, physical violence. We understand that a lot of inmates try to have some spikes, yes, and they want to use spikes against other inmates. There is all a moral code. Inmates told us, you have to be strong. You have also to wearing some marks of the prison, and or you have to stay in your corner. And sometimes you have to do both. Stay in your corner, and if you cannot stay in your corner, you have to be strong with the spike. There is and also form of violence, the distance from the family. And they suffer a lot of lack of money, of food, and they have to deal with a lot of various anxieties. And there is a lot of addiction. So if you remember, Frédéric and I asked the questions about the prison as a resource. And so what does it mean to provide care in prison? It's risk management, soothing detention, or providing access to care. Sure, for example, a prisoner can benefit from a screening, but how to deal with the announcement of illness handled via VIH or TB and other illness. The access to care is exhausting, but in a context of understaffing and shortage of specialists. You have to wait few months without any dentist, for example. Sometimes you suffer from a stigma attached to you receiving a treatment. So how can you receive your treatment and avoid this stigma? And what happens to treatment? We understand that in the context of scarcity, lack of money, and relation of powers, there is a lot of drug trafficking. You receive some medicinal drugs and then you sell on you because you need money. And so you didn't receive what you have to take for your illness. So at the start of the fieldwork in French Guiana, I found the space more structured with thresholds, doors. I felt less oppressed than in Yaoundé's central prison, where everything is delegated to inmates and overcrowding is so palpable. So we were thinking that the prison in French Guiana was a place for healthcare, and it's partially true. But gradually, I come to understand with Frédéric that inmates in French Guiana were only allowed out in the yard for 2 hours a day because of tensions between criminal groups and overcrowded spaces. They have no liberty, no freedom. They have to stay 22 hours in the cell and in an overcrowded cell. We identified traffics and above all violence and a lack of activities. And so the guards and also the officials of the prison told us that yes, in French Guiana, the delinquency was South American delinquency. So the prison of French Guiana has a developing country problem because of gold and drug traffic, because of the relation to Brazil, to Suriname, to Guyana. So I think it's kind of essentialization. I see a double denial. First, the French colonial history. There is a carceral continuum between poor and sometimes informal neighborhood and prison. In prison, in French Guiana, you can see that a lot of inmates are not French, but they were born in France. They just have difficulty obtaining French nationality. And some others are French, the racial young men. So it's not a question of being a developed or undeveloped country, I think. It's about racialization and inequalities at different scales. Also, violence remains intrinsic to prison. Finally, by mapping prison space, crossing informal appropriation and formal architecture, Goffman is still relevant in the tropics, in Cameroon and also in post-colonial or post-colonial France. Our ethnographies testified to the banality of prisons in Africa or at the frontier of Brazil and Suriname and at the end in France. Deprivation, competition, violence, but also negotiations, pacifications. Guards and inmates have to deal with the reality of the prisons. But what I can try to highlight, I lost my, it doesn't matter. I think if I come back to Cameroon, the place of third party is very important. In Cameroon, also in Africa, there are a lot of often extra-national actors. So prisons in Cameroon, in Africa, are seen as institutions to be reformed between national context and international logics. For example, the European Union, bilateral cooperations, wish to develop prison reform plans in various countries. So this implies that there is a model, usually Western, for good punishment. Many reforms eventually take place in context of democratization. Others exist and sometimes fail in authoritarian context with some resistance from the country. For example, still in Cameroon, 10 years ago, the European Union set up a reform program in and with the Cameroon state. Its aim was to reform criminal law and fight against overcrowding. The program's main achievement was to release prisoners, but without transforming the repressive dimension of Cameroon's justice system. A one-off action that reflects the authoritarian state's resistance to any change. So reform is often conceived in a north-south sense, especially in Africa in relation to Europe, Cameroon, and Europe or France. It is the subject of sometimes difficult negotiations between international organizations and national administrations. We can think there is also a way of reforms more discreet, almost invisible, carried by volunteers, religious people with their daily actions in prisons. But sometimes, as we can see, the North is at the same impasse. In France, in French Guiana, the temptation is to think that foreigners are the problem. It's the reason of delinquency, it's the reason of overcrowded prison. Even the foreigners are from France. So I think that the comparison should encourage us to think of each prison in its one uniqueness, but to reflect on what we have in common. The criminalization of the poorest, their possible racialization, the control of popular illegalism in a context of massive inequality. So prisons, it's not new. It's always about inequality and power, and it is a place for understanding these relations. So I hope that more fieldwork in French Guiana will help us to stop the opposition between North and South and the essentialization of the South prisons. So it's all. Thank you.